Back in high school, my friends and I would love to go to our local movie theater that was situated inside of our shopping mall. We usually would travel in big groups, but this time, it was only my friend Alex and I. We had picked up a late night showing of some obscure movie. I can't recall the name because this happened years ago, and we arrived on time to find our seats. Since the showing was late and the movie wasn't a box office hit, the theater was empty. We situated ourselves in the middle, where we could get a perfect view of the screen. Strangely enough, a couple that arrived late decided to sit in our row, with only 2 seats between us and them. My friend and I exchanged confused looks and then shrugged it off, figuring it was solely because we had prime viewing seats. As the theater got dark, things got a little weird. The woman of the pair kept looking over at us every few minutes. The first few times I figured she was just a nervous person and was adjusting to her surroundings. Yet maybe an hour into the movie, she had kept the pattern up. She wasn't even discreet with her staring because she would turn her head completely towards us, and I could see her entire face. I still see it in my head today. I nudged my friend and told him about the girl staring, and he whispered that he had noticed too. At this point, I was feeling very anxious and almost wanted to leave the movie early. My friend didn't want to though, so I decided staying with him was safer than leaving alone. And I was his ride home too. Throughout the movie, the girl continued to look over. Every now and then, she would whisper something to her counterpart, but he himself never looked over. Once the movie had ended, I grabbed my friend by the arm and told him that we should get going because it's late. He followed suit as I sprinted out of the theater. Once we were out, the halls were empty because of the fact that barely any films played towards the end of the night. I was about to say something to my friend about how the couple next to us had freaked me out, but right then, they ran out of the door seconds after us. I was freaking out on the inside, but decided to try my best to keep my composure. My friend was definitely aware of them closely following us out of the theater, but he isn't the type to be confrontational, so we just sped walked to my car. Once we got in the car, my intuition told me just to get out of the parking garage as fast as I could. I saw the weird couple make it to their blue car, which was on the same parking garage level as us. That wasn't surprising because the entrance to the mall is on that level, so everyone parked there. I sped out of the parking garage and drove towards the main street. I told him to keep a lookout and see if there was a blue car that was following us. He looked back and said that the coast was clear. I felt so relieved. Now, we were the only ones on the main highway because it was late at night, and we live in a quiet, suburban area. But then a few minutes later, a car came speeding up from behind and flashed their high beams on me. My heart started to race. My head just told me that it was them. I asked Alex if the car was blue, and he said that he couldn't tell. The light to turn left onto the next main street was green, so I took the left turn necessary to get to my neighborhood. The car backed off and turned on the normal lights, but it turned left too. I caught a glimpse of the car, and I started yelling once I had realized that it was the weird couple's blue car. Alex told me to gun it, so I slammed on the gas and sped down the last main street before I had to turn into his neighborhood. The blue car wasn't tailgating me, but it was clearly following not too far behind. When the streets are empty, it's easy to follow someone since there aren't any other cars to dodge. I turned into my friend's neighborhood, but decided to drive past his street so that they wouldn't see where we were trying to go. The blue car followed us into the quiet neighborhood, and was picking up speed to get closer to us. My friend Alex was panicking and asking what I was going to do, but I just kept quiet as I sped quickly down a random neighborhood street. I could see the car's lights behind me as I made a turn onto another street, but they were far enough so that they couldn't see me for about 30 seconds after I took the next turn. After I turned onto another unfamiliar street, I turned my car off and flipped it into neutral gear. My car is a manual, so I'm very familiar with driving it, and I knew that I had enough momentum to roll into an empty parking spot, even though my car was turned off. I slipped into the spot on the curb and pushed the brakes to get to a stop before the blue car could clear the turn to get onto the street. I reclined my seat back completely and told Alex to lean all the way forward and to not move. We sat there in silence and in the dark car, my ears ringing from how quiet it was. My heartbeat was fluttering faster than it ever had before. I think it was a mix of fear and adrenaline. Within a few seconds, the blue car had cleared the turn and started slowly driving down the street. It made its way past my car that was parked on the side of the street. Luckily for us, I drive a standard black Scion TC. There is nothing notable about the car. I haven't even changed the license plate frame. So they must have figured that the cars parked on the road belonged to the people that lived in the neighborhood. Alex and I literally stayed in our hiding positions for 10 minutes, just in case the weird couple decided to drive by again. Luckily, they never did. Once we got up, we just stared at each other and didn't know what to say. We were both freaked out and had no idea of what the couple had planned to do if they had caught up to us. To this day, I still don't know what their intentions were. Maybe they were just a couple of deviants who enjoy freaking out high school kids. Or maybe they even had more sinister plans for us. All I know is that I don't go to the movies late at night anymore, unless I'm with a big group of friends. Today, I decided to take my two children, 5 and 8, to go see a Sunday matinee at the movie theater. The Secret Life of Pets 2 was nearly out of the theater, so we decided that we would be our best bet to beat the crowds. We went to the 11:55 a.m. showing, and stepped in a bit late to find we had a theater all to ourselves, and my kids were thrilled. I allowed them to dance around if we're alone in the theater. If others are present, they have to be on their good behavior and stay seated and quiet. Since the movie is older, it was in a room in the very back of the building, far away from anyone or other rooms. The previews were still rolling when a man, I would say in his late 50s, stepped into the room. He immediately started looking my way as he walked to the row behind me and proceeded to sit down directly behind me. Literally the seat and row right behind mine when the entire theater was empty. Now, I know adults can sometimes want to go to a children's movie alone. I realize that alone doesn't make him creepy. However, my gut instinct was this is very bizarre. In Toy Story or Lion King, sure, I would understand him being there. But this is a very obscure movie, and it's a sequel. Beyond that, why would anyone sit right behind me knowing it might look odd that they are even present at this movie in the morning on a Sunday? I immediately got up. I'm around 6 feet tall, and I'll admit, I wanted him to see that I'm no easy target. I moved to the other side of my children and turned so I was facing him. He looked extremely uncomfortable since entering the theater, and he was very fidgety. His foot was tapping, and I quickly snapped a picture of my kids with the camera focused in on him. I moved my daughter to my lap so she was out of his reach, and I was racking my brain on my next move. I was in the very back of this building, with the sound blasting, and I had 2 children with me, alone in a huge room with one door leading out with this stranger. This guy was obviously a creep. You could just tell by his behavior and body language. I thought about complaining to management, but what was I even going to say? I mean, technically, he has every other right to be there, so I just kept my eyes on him. The movie started, and he watched for a moment, glancing my way and at the screen repeatedly with his leg still bouncing nervously. I started to form an exit plan in my mind. A minute or two into the film, he got up and hurriedly raced towards the door. I waited a few, hoping that he wouldn't return, and he didn't. I'm sure that I was making it uncomfortable by turning all the way around and looking his way, but all I could think was, why would he be sitting directly behind me in this huge theater room? I wasn't even in the center of the theater, and my placement with the kids was very random and not an ideal spot to sit. He could have grabbed me from behind and ran with my kids. He could have been a weirdo who wanted to take care of himself while watching my children and I. He never returned, but I'll never forget how he looked. As we left, I stopped by information to speak with the manager and another employee. The first thing they said after I showed them his picture and pausing was, "There were only 3 tickets sold to this movie, and we don't recognize him as someone who has at one of the other movies either. Those 3 tickets were for me and my children. The theater complex was completely dead. He had to walk by literally every other movie in this huge movie complex to get to the room that I was in. It was late morning and literally most of the other movies all started at this time. Trust your instincts. Even if you offend someone, I've learned the hard way that you have to go with your gut. I still don't know what could have happened today, and I still have chills thinking about it. It could have been someone movie hopping, but many other films that started at that time. His seat choice and nervousness tell me otherwise." One of my best friends, Joe, we were both 16, worked at a movie theater in high school, and told me that they were doing interviews for the first 20 people that showed up that day at 2 p.m. Naturally, I ditched school and headed to the mall the theater was attached to, as I was eager to get my first job. As the second person in line, I quickly knew the job was as good as mine. The first person was wearing a tux, a full coat and tie, and most of the other people looked like they were just walking through the mall when they saw the posting. My ability to quickly get along with people means that interviews go really well for me. This interview was the first time I realized this ability. Little did I know, there were hidden reasons behind this particular interview. As it turns out, the manager, Abby, around her mid-20s, that interviewed me was the best friend of Joe's sister. It was how Joe got the job. Once she asked me if I knew anybody that worked there, our conversation quickly turned to Joe and how awesome of a dude he is, which I wasn't lying about just to get the job. After a few minutes of this, the interview ended, and they told me that they would be in touch if I got the job. When I saw Joe later that day, he told me he was pretty sure that I had got it. And the next day, I was asked to come in and fill out my paperwork. Boom. Much to my dismay, I was hired with 5 other people who were all there filling out their paperwork. You mean to tell me that I'm not the best? I'm just in the rough top third. Whatever. At the end of our 90-day intro period, I'll be the only one remaining. A few days later was my first shift and I was working with 2 other newbies, DeMarcus and Jane, plus somebody Brian who would have worked there for a couple of years. He was to train us as much as you can train somebody to tear tickets and sweep popcorn. DeMarcus and Brian were smart butts and talk constant crap like me, so I like them. Jane stays quiet and mumbles when talks. I'm indifferent to her. Over the next 90 days, DeMarcus and I become good buddies. Abby kind of looks out for me and gets me extra hours working on random projects. Jane comes out of her shell, which started out nice, but eventually turned sour. At the end of our 90 days, DeMarcus, Jane, and I were the only 3 kept from our hire group, and we were moved to work in concessions and the box office, while the new batch of people were hired for the theater cleaning. Jane and I were now working in closer quarters, which taught me 2 things. 1, Jane smells really bad all the time, and 2, she likes rubbing my arm. Indifference turns to constant annoyance of Jane's presence. Jane began making me uncomfortable constantly. I had spoken with another manager, Tara, about what was going on, and if she saw Jane and I working in the same area together, and our station didn't require us to be there that moment, she would ask for one of us to go do another task which would separate us for a short period. Well, one day, while exiting the break room, down a set of stairs with a 90-degree turn with landing, Jane was coming up to start her break. She cornered me on the landing, hugs me, stinking up my work clothes, and prevents me from continuing down the stairs. I told her to leave me alone and pushed past her. Abby was just outside of the door at the bottom of the stairs, so I told her what had happened. Now, if this story was a train, right now would be the point that the train pops off the tracks, shoots 10 feet over, and lands on another set of tracks heading for a dark tunnel. Abby's solution was to force Jane and I to work in these same areas more often, assigning us to registers right next to each other, and basically the exact opposite of what Tara did. Abby is now on my crap list. Around this time, someone who used to work at the theater came back. His name is Jim. Jim and I are both tall and skinny with dark hair, and people often comment that we look like brothers. Fun fact, Jim used to date Abby, but Jim now hates her but was in desperate need of a job, and he was friends with the general manager who had rehired him. Abby began ramping up the creep factor. With Jim around, it became apparent that she was not over him, and her solution was to show me more attention, with or without him around. It made me a little uncomfortable, but nowhere near as bad as how Jane made me feel, who had now completely stopped her creep behavior. Abby tells me a plan that she is to take Joe to Disneyland for his birthday, and she wanted me to go. She wants to surprise him, so her plan was to go 5 months before his actual birthday. Pretty sure that he wasn't expecting it. The day of, it is me, Joe, Joe's sister, and Abby. Joe chokes on some cotton candy, don't ask how, and being the good friend that I am, I laughed uncontrollably and told him it would have been ridiculous to die at the happiest place on earth from cotton candy. He agrees, and I digress. Things were going well until Abby tells me the real reason that she had hired me. I reminded her of Jim. It had nothing to do with my interview or how well she thought I could do. I was her eye candy. I said something along the lines of, well, glad I was actually good enough to keep around. And then I started to speed up a bit to catch up to Joe. Abby then says, hey, guess what? Nobody else from work is here. And then she reaches out and grabs my butt. Screaming, what the heck? I ran to catch up to Joe. The rest of the day she keeps trying to do this, and when that wasn't an option because I was sitting down eating, the next logical step was to lick the side of my face, jaw to temple. I made it quite clear that that was unacceptable with an eloquently worded, what the heck is wrong with you? Why would you do that? Since it was quite clear I was no longer having fun and the day was winding down anyhow, Joe stated he wanted to go home. It was a quiet 2.5 hours home. The following day, I was scheduled to work late evening and was told I would be tasked with touch-up painting all around the theater. Little did I know, Abby would be working the same hours. I wasn't thrilled to be working with her, and less happy that she decided to follow me around the entire night. She never once touched me, or made any sexually inappropriate comments, which I attributed to us being at work. However, what she did do for 7 hours was talk crap about every person that we worked with, the dirt that she had on them, and who she loved to screw. And this shift was the straw that broke the camel's back. When I got home at 3 a.m., I wrote a 5-page letter to the general manager explaining everything that happened with her. I explained that I didn't say anything at first because the most inappropriate stuff happened on personal time. But once I thought about it, there was so much wrongdoing from her that I needed to say something. The reason I put it in a letter was to make sure that I could get all of the details. After sleeping for a few hours, I delivered the letter to my manager and asked her to call me with any questions. The following 3 days were already scheduled off for me, and the next day I had to work was a previously planned staff meeting. We arrived at 8 a.m. and all staff is present except for one person, Abby. The meeting goes on like almost every other meeting. New policies, up-and-coming events, etc. Except there is a segment where the GM mentioned her open door policy for any harassment, and if they didn't feel comfortable talking to her, that she strongly encouraged them to talk to one of the assistant managers. She elaborated that any harassment would not be tolerated. Wait, was Abby suspended or fired? Oh no, what have I done? Yeah, my reaction was guilt. When the meeting ended, I went upstairs to check my schedule, which was located right outside of the manager's office. The GM asked me to come in and close the door. 2 other assistant managers were present. Crap, am I being fired? The GM very calmly says, "You may have noticed that Abby was not present this morning. This is not entirely due to your letter. In fact, your letter composed much of what I had suspected, heard rumors of, or had less severe cases reported to me. I thank you for bringing this to my attention, and you shouldn't feel guilty for what has happened. This is the result of her actions." I looked around the room and saw smiles on all 3 of their faces. I never got the full story, but it seemed every manager had horror stories regarding Abby. I continued to work there for years and gained a lot of great friends. After I turned 18, I was offered a position as an assistant manager. The GM asked me if I would mind being a main point of contact regarding harassment claims, because she believed I was the best suited to work through the issue. I was happy to be trusted with this, and it helped me become someone the employees would talk to regarding any issues, work-related or not. Abby, let's not see each other again. Although dealing with you gave me the strength to help others. When I was growing up, my dad and I lived with my grandparents. My parents had me while they were teenagers, and my dad got full custody because he lived with my grandparents and my mom was just living with random friends, going from house to house every few weeks. I was the daughter that my grandparents never had, and they doted on me. When I was 6, my grandpa passed away from cancer. This story takes place about 5 months after he had passed away. This was, I believe, a Saturday, and my dad was at work. My gram decided to take me to McDonald's for lunch, and like any 6-year-old, I was really excited. So, we go to the McDonald's that was about 1.5 miles from our house, order our lunch, and sit down at a table to eat. At the time, we were the only ones eating inside. About 10 minutes after we sit down, a scraggly-looking man walks in, orders a meal, and sits down at a table diagonally in front of us to the left. The area we lived in was middle and upper middle class, so this guy looked pretty out of place. Graham had her back to him, but I could see him perfectly. This man was at least in his mid-50s, with a scraggly and dirty white hair and beard. He had on blue shorts and a white t-shirt, also kind of dirty, and sandals. It's amazing that this happened 21 years ago, and I can still remember it like it was yesterday. So, I noticed that under the table, this man had something dark pink and wrinkly on his lap, and he kept glancing at me and rubbing it every few seconds. In kindergarten, we learned about stranger danger and good touch, bad touch, and learned which parts of our body we're not supposed to touch. It clicked in my 6-year-old head that this man was not supposed to have it out like that, nor to be doing what he was doing. I got really queasy and nervous. I didn't want to tell my grandma right then and there because I thought the man would hurt us. If my dad had been there, I would have said something because my dad was my hero and he could take on anybody. Instead, I put my Happy Meal box in front of my face so my view of this guy would be blocked. I had about half my food left, but I had lost my appetite. Grandma asked me if I was full and I just nodded yes. I was and still am very petite, so not finishing a full meal was nothing new to me. She asked me if I wanted to go play in the play area before we left, but I just shook my head and quietly said, I want to go home. Graham cleared our table and we left. When we got home, I was still really nervous and I felt like I was going to throw up. Graham asked me, what's the matter? And I started crying and told her about the man at the McDonald's and what I saw. My grandma didn't panic or freak out or get hysterical. She just hugged me and said, it's alright, go into your room and play and I'll take care of it. She wiped my tears and gave me a blueberry Kool-Aid burst and told our dog Patches to go to my room with me, and which she did. After I was out of earshot, Grandma called the McDonald's and told them about the guy, and he was still there. The manager told Graham that he would take care of it and call her back. An hour later, the manager calls back and tells Grandma that they had called the police, who showed up in record time and arrested the guy. When the police told the man to stand up, his franken beans were still hanging out of his shorts. The manager also told Graham that she could bring me back for a month's worth of coupons for free Happy Meals. I have another story about a weirdo that happened a few years later, and this time my dad was there, and believe me, what my dad did to him was not pretty. But that's a story for another time. This happened 4 years ago. I'm a girl, and at the time this happened, I was 12, going on 13 in just a month or two. The friend that I mentioned in the story was 14 at the time. The friend Sally, who I was staying with that night, was quite a bit older than me. At least at the time, the 2-year age gap was quite big. At 12 or 13, I was about to start my second year of middle school, whereas Sally should have been about to begin her sophomore year of high school. I met her in the beginning of my first year at a new school. She was older than the other kids in our grade and was considered one of the popular kids, and I think that was what drew me to her first. We became fast friends, and before we knew it, we were spending every single weekend together. Seriously, every single weekend. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. It was your typical Friday night. We carpooled to our family's apartment after school. I've always been a picky eater, so when our family had dinner, I didn't eat with them. I just snacked on the Pop-Tart that I had stowed away in my backpack in case they had ordered something that I wouldn't eat. Something to note is that her family was pretty religious. I wouldn't go as far as to say as they were fanatics, but they didn't allow their kids to watch horror movies or anything that was rated PG-13 or older. It didn't stem from the desire to protect them from something inappropriate. Sally's mother had an irrational fear that scary movies had satanic messages. We asked to watch The Purge, and her mom obviously said no. After some negotiating, she agreed to let us watch The Hunger Games instead. After the movie, Sally and I went to hang out in her room. She put on some music, and being the age we were, we gave each other makeovers. By the end of it, we were looking older than 12 or 14. This part of the night is when things started to seem off to me. Sally wasn't the most positive influence. Despite being my best friend at the time, she was manipulative and got off on putting me down. She had a habit of talking to men online and lying about her age. Sally showed me some text messages between her and the man that she was talking to. I can't give you an exact recount of them, but they consisted of him trying to convince her to meet up with them, and just the usual things you would expect from a creep online. According to him, he was 19, tall and blonde with soulful blue eyes. Once I saw the text messages, I asked if she had a picture of him. Something didn't sit right with me after seeing the messages. She showed me what he looked like, and he was clearly not 19. This man was at least 40, and looked like he lived in his mother's basement. And then we got a call from him. Sally answered without hesitation, and when I heard the voice on the other end of the call, I felt like I was going to be sick. "Why don't you come meet me?" he asked. Sally said that she couldn't because she was spending the night with a friend. The mention of that sparked his interest, and then he proceeded to try and ask us both to meet him. Sally, lacking any common sense, said yes. Thus began her plan for us to sneak out and walk 15 blocks to meet him in a deserted McDonald's parking lot. I didn't want to go. I was raised on stories of what happens to teen girls who meet random men from the internet in person. But after adamant pleading from Sally that she didn't feel safe going by herself, I agreed. We took our phones with us for the walk. I had a kitchen knife on me just in case something were to happen, and I needed to defend myself. The route that we had to take to get there didn't have very many street lamps, and there weren't any houses. We were surrounded by trees on both sides. When we got to the parking lot, the only car parked nearby was a black, beat-up 2000 Toyota Corolla. The car was still running when we got there, and from what we could tell, there was more than one person inside. The man from the picture got out of the front passenger seat, and left the door wide open behind him before approaching us. I turned my flash on so I could see, and he was obviously on something. I can't tell you what kind of drug it was for the life of me, but his eyes were so wide, they looked like they were about to pop out of his head. He was jittery and kept twitching. I became very conscious of how big he was, maybe 6'2", around 280 pounds. For reference, my friend and I did not look our ages, even without makeup. I'm about 5'2", and my friend was pretty tall, probably around 5'7". We were both significantly smaller than him. The man reached out for us and caught my friend by the arm. I went to get my knife as quickly as I could, and that's when I saw his friends getting out of the car. He invited us back to his car and offered us booze and drugs, but after seeing my knife and that I was ready to call the police, he let go of my friend. I took Sally's arm and ran faster than I ever had in my entire life. We took the long way home to avoid them finding out where she lived in case they were following us. Once we got there, her family was still sound asleep. We locked all the doors, closed the blinds, and blocked them on everything. There wouldn't be any sleeping that night. We were constantly peeking out the window, and to our dismay, that same Toyota was circling around her apartment building. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. I never mentioned any of this to my parents out of fear of getting grounded or getting in trouble. I'm 16 now and they still have no clue. But I still get nervous when I see a car similar to the one from that night. As for Sally, her parents never found out either, and we agreed to never speak about it again. Thankfully, she moved into a new house just a few weeks after that happened. It's safe to say, Sally and I haven't spoken in about 3 years. She was upset at me for ruining her night, and our friendship didn't last for long after that. We had a pretty bad falling out, but looking back on it, it was definitely for the better. So, to Sally, thank you for teaching me a very valuable lesson and making me realize that some people are best just left alone. And to the man and his friends who tried to prey upon us, let's never meet again. This happened in the early 2000s, and I was around 12 at the time. My dad had passed away about 2 years before leaving my mom, sister, and myself. To help me cope with my father's passing, my mom took me to the animal shelter to pick out a dog since having a large dog was something that I always wanted. In one of the cages was a small shepherd husky, huddled in the corner that I right away fell in love with. When this incident happened, he was about 1 year old, 90 pounds, and my best friend. My mom worked nights and my older sister was taking advantage that mom wasn't home and she would constantly leave me alone. I didn't mind though because then she couldn't boss me around since when she was home, she would try to be mom telling me what to do and when to go to bed. We lived in a small middle-class suburb with a low crime rate that I wasn't scared to be home alone. I was sitting in the living room playing video games and I got up to head to the kitchen to grab a drink. In the kitchen, I had a clear view through the back door and I could see the garage open. Thinking that I just left it open after putting my bike away, I headed out the door to close it. My dog was sleeping in the basement since he liked to lay on the cool floor during the summer months and I didn't think to take him out with me. I step out the door and make it about 5 feet from it when I notice in the darkness a crouched shadow moving in the garage. I froze, trying to get my eyes to adjust to make out what the shadow was. It finally hit me when I saw the figure stand up and turn towards me. I was terrified and felt like I had been glued to the spot. I knew that this person could see me since the back porch light was shining above me. At that moment, the figure starts running towards me. I was too scared to move and let out more of a yelp than a scream. But that was all it took for my dog to hear, and the next thing I hear is him behind me, snarling and growling. I could make out it was a man, but no features, when he now froze seeing this 90-pound beast behind me. He turned and ran for the back fence, with my dog right behind me. The guy made it to the fence, and since it was only about 4 feet, he hopped right before my dog got to him. After he got away, my dog came running back to me and we went inside where I barricaded the doors. I don't know why, but I didn't call the cops and never told my mom or sister what had happened. One thing that bothered me was that he had to have known I was inside, since the lights were on and the blinds were open. So why take the risk to hit a house when somebody was clearly home? The next morning, after my mom was home and went outside to finally close the garage door, and noticed that what he had been going through was my dad's toolbox. I locked up the garage and never told anyone about what had happened. I walked my dog to McDonald's and got him a burger and ice cream cone for being my hero. Stranger danger was something my mom was hyper-vigilant about teaching us. She would always warn us about the horse farm down the street, and told us that bad people lived there. Well, it was about a mile away and I usually was only that far from home, if I was on my bike or with a group, so I wasn't very concerned. One day, I was walking in my neighborhood when some neighbors I didn't know well began to talk to me. While we knew most of our immediate neighbors, this couple lived on a street perpendicular to ours, and I only interacted with them at Halloween if that. I was probably 7 or 8. They told me that they were giving away a trampoline, and oh man, I had always wanted a trampoline. I begged my parents for one for years. I was pretty excited to say the least, but I told them that I would have to ask my parents first. They told me that I could have it, that it was in the backyard waiting for me, but not to come back with my parents. I thought that was a little strange and didn't listen to them about not getting my parents, but I still wanted the trampoline. Now, my dad is a totally oblivious person, so apparently when I told him, this didn't raise any red flags and he came along with me to ask about the trampoline. We knocked on the door and waited at their front steps, but no one came to the door. I was bummed out. I really wanted that trampoline. Years later, reflecting on the event, I realized that there was a small fenced area in that yard where they would sometimes ride a horse. I once had even pet the horse and admired the owner as she rode it. I didn't think of it as a farm as aside from the one horse and the fenced-in area. It was a normal yard, so my mother's warnings were in vain. I shudder thinking about what would have happened if I had gone to the house alone. Thankfully, I had a bit of sense, though at the time I didn't realize how close I was to danger. Just how close I was to having a trampoline before those people inexplicably took my dream away. My roommate V was always at her boyfriend's place, so I was living essentially alone in a 2-bedroom apartment and my friend Esme was crashing with me while looking for her own place. She found a place nearby renting a master bedroom with an attached bathroom, female only, for really cheap. We checked out the Google Street View on my laptop and it looked like a cute little beach house. She rode her bike over to check it out alone. She said that they were 2 beach-type stoner guys, and they would close talk while giving her obvious elevator eyes the whole time. She was a pretty petite Mexican girl and was 21, but looked younger, and the older guy kept saying that she was just what they were looking for, kinda slowly in what she described as an uber creepy voice. The younger of the 2 guys just stared and followed them around. She thought that it was odd that they each slept in the tiny guest rooms and they were renting out the master bedroom, but decided to take a look at it anyway. She said it was a really nice room with a big heavy wooden 4-poster bed in the middle of the room. That looked like it belonged in a castle, and the bathroom had a huge shower with multiple shower heads on the walls, like it was built for a bunch of people. She didn't like being in this back bedroom with the 2 guys looming over her, so she said it was really stuffy and that she wanted to make sure her unlocked bike in the front yard was okay. She all but ran to the front yard, and once she was outside with bystanders, she felt much better. So she's standing in the front yard with the older guy and he's explaining that she can move in right away, but the bed has to stay exactly where it is. It comes with the room and it's bolted to the floor, so it can't be moved. They have special sheets for it and everything, so she can bring all their stuff, but can never move that bed. Also, she can have friends over, but only if they're also young women or girls and no men. and they can sleep over, but they also need to sleep in the bed. The hardwood floor was just too uncomfortable. The couches in the living room are suede, so no one can sleep on them. All these reasons why a big pile of girls need to sleep on the bed. So she's sufficiently creeped out by this guy and texts me to come over. I ride my bike over, and as I'm pulling up, she's leaving. We start to ride a little away and he yells after us. It's mandatory, but we always have a blast. She kind of shudders and I asked her what's up. She said that she'll tell me over drinks, so we ride to the nearest little beach bar. She explains about the room, the bed, the guys, and then tells me part of the deal is a mandatory skiing trip to Lake Tahoe in Northern California each year. She can invite girls on the trip that have been to the house before, if the guys think they're cool enough. It's free for her and her girlfriends, but mandatory that she go with the guys as their official woman. There would be other men, but they would all have brought their own girls. He said it like the woman would be assigned to them or something. So our minds start racing and we convince ourselves that the bedroom and the trip are some elaborate scam. Needless to say, she never moved in there or took them up on their free ski weekend offer. Vi ended up moving in with her boyfriend, and Esme moved in with me for a couple years. She was an awesome roommate. I recently moved into an apartment close to my workplace in the city. It's a garden-level apartment that faces a parking garage for the city's education department, and a patio-like section of foliage, trees, and leaves. Connected to this patio is the alleyway. I've been living here for 2 months, and the apartment itself is pretty quiet. Most of the tenants are just normal blue-collar folk, grad students and hipsters basically. Nothing crazy or weird living here. A needle exchange opened up basically across the alleyway this summer and has attracted unsavory characters. In the US, needle exchanges are extremely controversial and are only allowed in several states. Many of them have been hanging around the back of the alleyway and pooping and peeing out there. The leasing office and landlord of the building is trying to get the city to help with this problem. My first encounter with these peeping, druggy toms was one Saturday morning. I awoke to hear all this moaning and groaning from outside the patio tree area. When I opened my eyes and peeped outside, I saw a guy completely high on something, sharpening sticks right outside of my window. I was super scared, but didn't know if he saw me because I quickly hid under my kitchen table and called non-emergency police. And they sent someone out to investigate like 30 minutes later. And when the cop car appeared, he moaned out and walked away from the scene before they got to the patio area. The second time was me sleeping the night before work. It was literally the night of my birthday. I heard pounding at my window at around 11 p.m. and I awoke to it. I had my window slightly cracked open to let cool air in. I don't have air conditioning. And I heard the sound of rap music coming from either a small speaker or a phone. I originally thought the pounding was from a neighbor or upstairs, but then I realized that the pounding was coming from the window behind me. It got worse and worse with accompanying moaning and blaring rap music. I called the non-emergency police and they told me they would send someone out and to take a look. And this continued for another 15 minutes and I had to go to the bathroom desperately. I couldn't just sit there and hide in my bed. I crawled to my kitchen, got a knife and went to the bathroom. I figured the burglar bars on my apartment window would deter the pounding. The pounding stopped when I came out of the bathroom. It got almost too quiet. Something about the vibes, the feeling just didn't feel right. I decided, I don't know why still, to peek through the blind slats and I shined my phone flashlight through them. What I saw was the guy's face staring right through me in the blinds. It was horrific. The pupils were completely dilated like a cat, almost, and he could see me and the knife. He pounded right back at me through the burglar blinds and screamed, "I'm going to kill you." I don't know what he was on, but he was extremely aggressive and he seemed invincible to it. I got so scared and was in a ton of shock that I shut the crack while he was continuing to pound and turned up his rap music. I ended up crawling back down to my low-lying bed and calling the police. What ended up happening was the cops came once again, about 30 minutes later or so. When they came, I heard the guy moaning in alarm and I saw him running off as I peeked through the blinds on a BMX bicycle. When I talked to the cops, they were more concerned about how he looked like than what he did, and seemed overall unconcerned and not very reassuring. I ended up missing work, not getting much sleep, and having to spend half the day recuperating during my birthday. My solution now was shutting the blinds tighter and closing the window at night, and trying to use the cooler and fans before nightfall. I'm also thinking about getting curtains to pull over the blinds, but overall I feel like this is challenging due to the heat and not having AC. I want to stay cool and the night breeze really helps, but it's tricky because there are creeps outside. When I told my boss that I wasn't coming into work the following day, he recommended that I seek a room at a higher ground. I don't know if that will help, and possibly it could be more dangerous, since there are no burglar bars on the first floor and above, while my garden level does and really is what saved my butt from that guy bursting in and wanting to kill me. I'm an extremely frightened chick from this experience, and I've gotten more paranoid since. My boyfriend has been really kind this past weekend. This happened on a Thursday night, and offered to stay over more. Since then, it's been quiet, but I heard someone last night yelling outside so loud that I could hear it through the shut window. I feel like the cops have not been helpful and they don't take this seriously. In college, there was an adult student I knew who participated in some of the meetings hosted by a scholarship program that I was in. He was a very well-known musician on campus. I didn't know him well, but we were acquaintances. We were friendly on campus, and I think one time he came by my apartment and a large group of people to have some drinks. He seemed quirky, but nothing about him seemed wrong or bad. Until I ran into him at a 24/7 grocery store just off campus one Saturday night. I was there with my boyfriend and some friends, and since we were friendly, I said hi and asked him how he was. He was drunk, very, very drunk. As we're talking, he breaks down, professing how much and how long he had been interested in me, and saying how inappropriate it was since I was in a relationship, and he repeated this for about 20 minutes. He also talked about problems in his family. This happened about 3 years ago, so I don't remember all the details, but I'm pretty sure one family member had killed another, and other sorts of crazy stuff. I was a little stunned into silence about all of this, because having a drunk man crying and professing an interest in me in a grocery store around midnight was not what I expected when I said hi to a guy that I barely knew. But nonetheless, I stood there and was supportive. I told him that he was right. I was in a relationship, so there wasn't a chance for him, and mostly just nodded along and told him that he was a good human being and shouldn't be hard on himself. But then it got weird. He told me that one night he came by my apartment. He found the door unlocked, so he had walked inside. He wanted to see me, to come into my room, but he couldn't remember which of the 3 bedrooms was mine. He stood in the common space for a little while, but decided to leave instead of guessing at the doors. He told me that it was probably a good thing that he couldn't remember which room was mine, because he really wanted to be with me that night, and if he had remembered which room was mine, he would have come in. And if he came in, he doesn't think he would have been able to stop himself and would have forced himself on me. That was his description. At some point in the conversation, although I don't recall if it was before or after his confession of coming into my home, he leaned in to kiss me. I turned so he only got my cheek. I was so stunned through all of this that I didn't know how to leave. My boyfriend at the time saw him try to kiss me, and initially got upset about it and walked away. I think he did eventually come back and rescue me from that conversation. The next day, I got a message from him on Facebook. I have cut out some filler, but the message is still there. Wow, I can't believe what happened last night. I was crying. There is something about you that I love, but I hold back in fear of a broken heart. All the things I said that night were true. I would love to hang out with you, but I know I would want to touch you, and again, you have a boyfriend. That wouldn't be fair to either of us. Sorry for all the misspelled words. I don't care about that. As you know, I'm a music guy, so words don't mean that much, and it's funny if I misspell them. I'm going to stop typing now. Take care. Peace, love, respect, always. Respect that he may come into my bedroom while I'm asleep and force himself on me. I talked to a staff member in my scholarship program to explain that I didn't feel safe around this guy, and to please help that there wouldn't be any situations where the two of us were alone together. And up until last week, I haven't thought about him in over 2 years. But last week, he sent me a message wishing me a happy birthday. I was kind of shocked that I hadn't removed him as a friend on Facebook considering how creepy he is. So today, I went to remove him. Turns out I had. Over 2 years ago, around the time that I graduated. When you're not friends, you don't get reminders of people's birthdays, so he had to have memorized it. He's blocked now. So please, let's never meet again. In my bedroom, in my home, in a grocery store, or anywhere else. It was New Year's Eve, my birthday, and myself and 2 of my friends were out in the front of my house listening to music on my iPod. We were about 12 at the time, and there was no one else around. It was probably 10 or 10:30 at night, and we were waiting for the illegal fireworks to light up down the street. It happened every year at this time. It probably sounds a little weird. 12-year-old kids by themselves at 10:30 p.m. listening to Katy Perry in the middle of the street. But it wasn't too unusual. See, my neighborhood is very close and we all know all of our neighbors really well. So our parents who were in the house and ourselves weren't at all concerned. We were listening to Hot and Cold by Katy Perry. Yes, it was that time of the decade. And we were jamming along to it when we began to hear a whistle. Now, first off, it sounded like it was part of the song, so initially everyone ignored it. But that was until it started to distort and go out of rhythm to the music playing. It didn't seem to be in tune with the song, and it was eerily out of pitch. I don't know why, maybe to hear it better, but my friend decided to pause the music. Maybe it was just in the song, or maybe the phone was glitching. As soon as the music stopped, the whistling continued, pitchy and slow. We were all a little bit spooked and it was dark outside, other than the few streetlights on the road. We couldn't really see much or make out much of the darkness other than the strange whistling. We were able to pinpoint the direction it was coming from soon enough. We turned towards it and froze. About 10 meters from where we stood, just on the edge of the street lamp's light, was a man. He looked quite disheveled, most likely homeless, and he was just standing there, looking at us, whistling that godforsaken, pitchy whistle. We were all frozen for a while as I guess we were caught off guard, until my fight or flight kicked in. I yelled at my friends to get inside and they began to scream and run up the driveway. I pushed and shoved them forward, terrified because I don't know whether they could hear what I was hearing. But the whistling had finally stopped. But something else was drowning out the silence. Heavy-setted footsteps. He was chasing after us. I screamed bloody murder at them, opening the front door and shoving them inside, not caring if I hurt them. I turned and slammed the deadbolt just as he had reached the screen door. I watched as his figure came into view. He was dirty, wearing soiled long-sleeve clothing, had an unkempt beard and wore a torn beanie. As I closed the door, he stopped just ahead of the screen, looked me dead in the eye, and murmured something that still makes my skin crawl. Damn it. One of my friends consoled the other who was now in tears, as I watched him through the peephole. He lingered for a second more and then disappeared into the blackness. I remember my friends grabbing me asking if I was okay, and then pointing down to my hands. I was shaking like a leaf. We never told our parents. That was over 10 years ago, and it still gives me the heebie-jeebies to think what would have happened if we hadn't noticed the out-of-place whistling. This happened to me when I was a kid, and it is probably one of the creepiest stories I have to tell. I think I was about 9 or 10 when this happened. It was definitely my birthday because we had the party at a nearby park. I think that it had been raining, but I was still excited that it was my birthday. We all had a good time, and me and my brother opened our presents and ate our cake. The only day kids loved as much as their birthday is Christmas, and I was really happy with all the presents that my friends had gotten me. By the time the party was over, it had stopped raining, and the sun was starting to come out. We picked up everything and put the presents in the car, and then we started to drive back home. The exit to the rather large park that we had been at goes through this big fancy metal gate and opens out to a circular intersection. We pulled into the intersection and took a left turn towards the state highway. This might be important later. Everything seemed normal at first, until we stopped at a crosswalk down the road from my street. I noticed my dad looking into the rearview mirror, and he muttered something to my mom. We kept driving and turned down my street and then into my driveway. I unbuckled and turned around to see what was the matter. I watched as my dad walked to a red car, maybe a sedan or a Prius, and spoke to the lady driving it. We all watched as she sped away. I remember getting really scared, and my mom brought me and my brothers inside while my dad had called the cops. An officer arrived at our house shortly, and my dad told me what had happened. Apparently, when we had stopped at the crosswalk, he noticed the lady in the car behind ours filming us. He watched to see if she followed us, and when she did, of course. When we got home and he approached her, all she said was, "I got what I wanted." The officer assured us that a lot of people like to film these stuff around them, as this was the time when cameras like GoPros were becoming popular. To this day, I'm still not sure why exactly that lady filmed us. Maybe we had cut her off at the intersection, or she didn't notice us stopping at the light ahead, braking just in time to prevent a fender bender or blaming it on us. We never really heard anything of her again. But I know this sounds cheesy, but it's the truth. I sometimes wonder if she'll come back. So, to the creepy lady who filmed my family on my birthday, let's not meet. I was about 7 years old, my brother about 10. It was well past our bedtime when our mom woke up off the couch to put us to bed. Our dad worked construction out of town back then, so it was often just the three of us at the house for weeks at a time. Up the stairs and to the immediate right was our parents' bedroom. Going left put you in the middle of a hallway. Taking another left led down that hallway to my brother's room. The opposite end was my room, which was also across the hall from our upstairs bathroom. At either end of the hallway are windowed doors we always kept locked and rarely used. The door on my end led to a balcony overlooking our front yard, and the door on my brother's end opened to our back porch. The house kind of leans into a small hill. My brother and mom both had a habit of waking up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I only knew this because I was always a light sleeper, and they just couldn't help flushing with the door wide open. This night, however, my brother stopped on his way to his room and came back towards the bathroom. I'm gonna try to pee before I go to bed. The past few nights I've been too afraid to walk to the bathroom. I keep seeing a man wearing stripes at the end of the hallway. I don't know if my mom wrote it off as my brother telling ghost stories to try and scare me, or if she was already half asleep and didn't catch it. But she didn't react at all to my brother's confession. I, on the other hand, was terrified by it. The fear of seeing a ghost like that at the end of the hallway or through the windows is the reason I started running from the stairs to my bedroom at night. Years later, when I was about 18, my mom and I were having a conversation in her car about a dog that we had for a very short time when I was little. We were sharing stories about Max's tendency towards destroying my shoes and other unruly behaviors when my mom blurted out, Do you remember that time I opened the front door for the cops and Max ran inside to the kitchen and started tearing open that big bag of dog food that we had? This really caught me by surprise because in all the years that I lived in that house, we never once called the cops. I asked her what she was talking about and she looked equally surprised, as if she had just revealed something by accident. Oh, that's right, I never told you because you were too young at the time. One night, I woke up hearing noises outside my window, and when I looked, I saw a man staring into my bedroom. She went on to describe how turning on the lights caused him to take off running, and how she grabbed my dad's pistol before calling the cops. I can't remember all the details I gave them when they showed up. A tall white male wearing a striped shirt and jeans, short dark hair, something like that. They said it matched the description of a man that they were looking for in the area. It turns out that he had escaped from jail on a murder charge. Now, I know it sounds so obvious hearing those two stories back to back, but it wasn't until a few years ago in my mid-20s that I pieced together that my brother had unknowingly warned us about a murderer who spent multiple nights casing our home. Back in 2005, my two friends and I went to the mall one night to do what 12 and 13-year-olds did on the weekends back then. I'm sure this was just about the age when you weren't cool unless you had a crappy knockoff Dooney and Burke purse. Mishka Barton was still relevant, and the collective angst of millions of misunderstood suburban children was just beginning to galvanize the scene subculture. I can still hear Fall Out Boy in the background. While roaming around the mall enjoying our few hours of freedom, we were just about to head into Forever 21 when we were approached by two men. The manner in which they approached us was direct, almost a beeline, and they were smiling. The first thing I noticed was that they looked older, somewhere in their mid-30s, but they dressed like high schoolers, with puka shell necklaces, Abercrombie and Fitch shirts, and spiky hair. It's funny how we can remember the most insignificant of details. I was surprised because, being small, skinny, and very obviously underage, very obviously still a child to normal people, men did not approach us out and about. They introduced themselves. We'll call them Blonde Guy and Brunette Guy because I don't remember their names. Neither of them ever broke their smiles, but they weren't natural. They looked forced. From what I can remember, the conversation went something like this. We were wondering if you ladies wanted to come to a party with us, the blonde guy asked. The brunette guy remained quiet throughout this entire conversation. No thanks, my friend Laura says. I stand there silent while my other friend, Kaylee, acts interested. The party isn't too far from here and we have a car. You guys should come with us. It would be a lot of fun. How old are you? The blonde guy asked. The scripted, over-enthusiastic way he spoke to me put me on edge. Hoping to deter them from talking to us any further, both Laura and I said we were 12, while Kaylee said she was 15. In retrospect, she was about as sharp as a marble in even the simplest situations. But then the blonde guy got pushier and kept trying to convince us to leave with them. No, we are really good with not going. My mom's coming to pick us up soon, Laura says again. The blonde guy kept persisting. Oh, your mom doesn't have to know. We'll have you back before she gets here. You won't get in trouble or anything. I do remember thinking this made no sense. Kaylee kept engaging with him, and he kept persisting, but she finally said no too. And then he looks directly at me. I still remember his exact words, because something about the way he said them made me feel queasy. Still smiling but quieter now, he responds, Oh, don't be shy, no one will notice. No one will find out. Laura again declined and I finally mumbled something like no, and we hurried away. I remember going into Forever 21 and looking back for a second to see if they were following us. They were standing there still, but blonde guy was now talking on his phone and glancing over. We spent some more time in the store, and by the time we left, they were gone. At the time, I thought it was creepy, but I gave it little thought. But now that I'm an adult, everything about that situation screams kidnapping, or something along those lines. And the saddest part is, we were in a mall with hundreds of people walking around, but no one was paying any attention. Had we really been so naive as to leave with them, there's a very good chance that no one would have noticed, and no one would have ever found out. Okay, so this is a story about the strangest birthday I've ever had. For context, I'm from Germany and the legal age to drink here is 16 for beer and wine, and 18 for liquor. So, on the day that I turned 18, me and my best friend decided to go out to our nearest city to grab some drinks at the local bar. It's pretty popular. But since it was a Tuesday night, on school summer break, there weren't that many people around. So, we just enjoyed spending time together, meanwhile sipping on margaritas. All of a sudden, the waitress, who I actually kind of knew because she previously graduated from the school that I went to, comes up to us, saying 2 men want to buy us a drink, pointing at a table at the other end of the outdoor section. At the time, it was around 10 p.m., and even though it was midsummer, it was starting to get dark, so we didn't really see what the guys looked like at first. And we just thought, yeah, why not, and went over to thank them. At this time, I recognized that they were younger-looking guys, in their early 20s, mid-20s max, and a middle-aged man that was obviously already intoxicated. The younger guy, let's call him Tom, asked us to take a seat, and since he seemed like a nice guy that wanted to chat, we agreed. So, as we were talking, getting to know each other a bit, I noticed the older guy intensely staring at me, like he didn't even blink. I looked at him as I noticed him, and it was then that he said, "How old are you? You're so beautiful. Do you even know how beautiful you are?" I told him that I had just turned 18 and laughed it off, clearly being uncomfortable, and I thanked him for the compliment, since I knew that he was clearly drunk, and I tried to change the topic. As we were talking about life in general, Tom tells us that the older guy is actually his neighbor, who is currently going through a divorce, and so he wanted to distract him with a night out. And we thought that it was sweet of him to help this guy going through a hard time. And then he mentions that his neighbor is an architect, encouraging him to maybe talk about his interesting profession rather than creeping on a young girl, because at this point he was constantly interrupting our conversation to tell me inappropriate things. And then the conversation turned dark real quick, and the guy started to talk about how he doesn't seem to have any sense in life anymore, and that he wanted to end himself. I also struggled with a lot of depression since I was a kid, so I wasn't super freaked out. I was more like feeling sad for the guy and tried to calm him down a little bit, while texting my best friend that was seated next to me, and how we could maybe get out of this situation. But then he said, "I can't, I just want to end it. I could do it right now," threatening his life, kind of begging us to tell him a reason to not do it right in front of us. Tom at this point just started to apologize and to calm him down, but it didn't really work. I mean, I felt sad for the guy. We maybe had just met him an hour and a half ago, and you never know what an intoxicated man that claims he has nothing to lose is really capable of. Me and my best friend, being scared now, come up with a plan over text to fake call some male friend of ours that we wanted to meet up. So, she changed my name in her phone quickly to a guy's name, and so I called her, while hiding my phone in the pocket of my vest. And let me tell you, my friend performed the most realistic fake phone call I've ever witnessed. So good actually that, for a moment I was like, wait, is she really calling me, or did she find a different friend to call? At that point, the man is just begging us not to go, making us even more uncomfortable. So, we just apologized ourselves, and as we were about to leave, Tom asked for my number. I wanted to leave quickly, so I just gave it to him, which he called immediately to make sure that it was legit, of course. But I blocked him right after he had texted me. If you ever read this, Tom, I'm sorry. You really seemed like a sweet dude. But this night was just not it, Chief. And me and my best friend still kind of joke about it until this day. How quickly it went from 0 to 100 that night, and how we were definitely not prepared for it. Nothing happened to us that night, but it was still frightening nonetheless. A longtime reader and first-time poster. This might not be written in the best grammar, so please forgive me. This story takes place back in April of 2018. I live on Long Island and I was in my freshman year of high school. I was going through a tough time. Earlier in the week, my girlfriend had broke up with me because of rumors she had heard about me, which I won't share here. There was a lot of drama going around my life at this point. Depression, broken hearts, typical high school BS. My mom knew that I was down in the dumps, so one night, she took me to get a new phone in the nearby mall. We were gone for about an hour, and we returned home with my dog greeting us. And let me tell you something about my dog. He's a short, stocky golden retriever who's never violent or vicious in any way. This is important for later. My dad was still at work, so it was my duty to take out the trash. I went through the front door with my dog resting on the porch, and went to the side of my house to throw out the trash. When I was throwing the bag, I look over to my neighbor's house where I saw a guy dressed in all black around 6 foot, walking out of their side door. Being a paranoid 14-year-old, I had so many red flags going off. Let me tell you something about my neighbors and my neighborhood. I live in a safe neighborhood, but not 15 minutes away from walking distance. We live by a town that has a high crime rate, ranging from muggings to drug dealing, and even murders from time to time. My neighbors, on the other hand, have an older stepson who drag races in that part of town. So, for some stupid reason, I wasn't in the fight or flight mode yet because I was assuming it could be one of his friends. It's stupid of me, I know. Until there was another man and then another. There were 6 guys dressed in all black coming out of the house and from the backyard. And then I knew what was going on, so I tried walking away as I saw nothing. When I was on my driveway, I saw 2 of the 6 guys slowly moving toward me. My blood went cold within a second as they were getting close. My dog went running off the porch, chasing these 6 men down the street into the night. My dog came back and was still standing on my driveway trying to process what I just saw. I went back inside with my mom asking me what had just happened. I told her what I just saw, with the 6 men coming out of the neighbor's house and heading towards me. We called the police and they came over to ask me questions. I described the men as best as I could. The police told us we're not the first to experience this, as there were 7 burglaries all over town at the time, and I probably witnessed them attempting to break in. I told the officers about 2 out of these 6 guys walking toward me after I saw them. They told me that, since I saw them, they were trying to stop a possible witness. That was basically a friendly way of them saying that the burglars were going to kill me since I saw what they were doing. As typical as this could get, the best they could do was a police report. I was always afraid of break-ins, but I never thought I would experience one. To this day, I'm still surprised at how my harmless golden retriever saved my life that night, and showed me that no matter where you are in this world, this could happen anywhere. 4 years have gone by, my family now has a gun, and I'm currently training in kickboxing for self-defense. To the 6 men who tried to break into my neighbors, I hope I don't see you again. Over the summer, I took a long solo trip to China. I was staying in the capital, which was super tourist friendly, so I was really comfortable getting about on my own, sightseeing, etc. One day, I was heading somewhere. I can't quite remember where anymore, and I came across this amazing huge park. It had a little river running through it and loads of flowers and trees. It was honestly huge. One little place near the back had actual playground equipment, like monkey bars and seesaws and stuff. In China, most parks had workout equipment too, and there were a bunch of old people working out while their grandkids were playing around. I tried using one piece of equipment as I thought it was confident in what it did and how to use it. I was not. I sat there so confused, and an old woman saw this and sat in the exact same one to my right and started demonstrating how to use it because she couldn't explain it to me in English. It was the cutest thing. The whole park was a very cute and wholesome place, or so I thought. I loved the park so much that I decided to go back just before I left. The rest of the park was very beautiful, but I loved the little playground part, so I headed straight there. The first time I was there, it was quite empty, which I liked, but this time it was very crowded. I decided to not hang about as most of the equipment was already taken, so I just walked straight through. As I was walking through, I felt a pair of eyes on me, so naturally, I turned my head in that direction. There was a guy a couple of feet from me just watching me as I was walking out of the park. He looked to be in his early 20s and harmless. Again, I was wrong. I ignored the gaze, turned back around and kept walking. The whole surrounding area was pretty empty due to how enormous this park was. So, there was no one around, but I could hear footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around to check, but instead, I just quickened my pace as I had a bad feeling about being in this deserted area. When I heard hello, which could have only been directed at me, because there was no one else around, I turned around and saw the guy from the park. I was in no mood to try to entertain this guy who was following me, so I turned back around and started walking even faster, and towards where I knew there would be other people. And then I hear him start running. He catches up to me and starts speaking in Chinese. Of course, I can't understand him, and I speak next to no Chinese, so I tell him in English, "I don't understand you." He keeps saying something over and over in which I couldn't understand, so I just started to try and walk away from him. But he grabs my arm really hard to try to keep me there. I looked at him with a facial expression to say, "What the heck are you doing?" And I yank my arm away. I'm practically running away from him now when he grabs my backpack and pulls me back. Just then, a family came into view, and as soon as the people appeared, he let go of me. I ran straight past the family and kept going until I found a bench to sit on to pull myself together. I made sure that there were other people nearby and that he wasn't following me anymore. I then pulled out Google Translate to try to figure out what the phrase he was kept saying to me over and over. I don't think I'll ever forget it or the expression on his face. It turns out that he was telling me, "It's okay," over and over while trying to attack me. I have no idea what would have happened if that family didn't appear, and I'm so glad I didn't find out. This year, my favorite cousin was getting married in Canada. My trip involved a layover in China where I was provided hotel and accommodation. At this point in the year, it was super hot in China. The problem was the AC wasn't working, along with all the electronics. I called the front desk to tell them of this problem, and one of their employees was sent up to try and fix the problem, but to no avail. After 30 minutes, I told him it's fine and I just wanted him to go because I had been exhausted from all the traveling and the lack of sleep. Fast forward to some point in the night, I woke up, which isn't that uncommon for me, but I heard something. In my dazed state, I saw someone at the end of my bed sitting. At first, I thought it was my cousin, and I told him that he could sleep on the couch, but then it hit me. At the end of my bed was that same man who was sent up to fix the power in my room. He was just sitting and undressing himself. At first, I couldn't say or do anything. I just thought in my head, this is what happens to solo travelers, and I prepared myself for the worst, but then I thought, screw this, and I screamed my heart out. The man got startled and ran away. I ran up to lock the doors but thought it was pointless since this guy probably had a key and could get back into my room anyway. I ended up spending the rest of the night awake, just staring at the door. When morning hit, I tried to tell the front desk about it, but there was a huge language barrier, plus my crying didn't really help. And then I noticed the guy who was in my room in the background, and I started shouting and pointing at him. They still couldn't really understand, and in the end, all they could tell me was sorry, and that he was drunk and thought it was his room. I'll give a little background about myself for my story. I'm a young gay male living in a medium-sized city. The dating scene is rather limited, and most gay people use apps or websites for meeting others for encounters or dates. I frequent websites and apps daily just to see if there's anyone new out there that I haven't already spoken to. Yet I rarely actually meet anyone from online. The fear of getting hurt or being robbed has always been in the back of my mind, so I generally just browse without ever actually meeting anybody. Around 6 months ago, while browsing Craigslist, I found an ad that seemed to be somewhat what I was looking for. The ad was by a man a little older than myself, who seemed to want the same things that I wanted. He wanted to meet up with a guy my age and get to know one over drinks, maybe a little cuddle session, and whatever else may follow, and not just a quickie kind of thing. After responding to the ad, the guy and I talked for about a month through texting without ever making plans of meeting. I finally got the confidence and asked if he wanted to meet. He agreed, and we decided that I would drive to his place, which was about 10 miles from me and out of the city limits. The day that we decided to meet, it was getting late, about 6 p.m. The sun was still somewhat out, but it was getting darker. I got in my car and drove out to the area where he lived. The guy texted me and said that he would be walking on the side of the road because he was coming back from visiting with a friend, and just asked that I pick him up to go back to his place. He told me before that he had 2 kids that lived with him, but that the kid's mother wasn't in the picture. He says that his kids were at a friend's house and he would be back later, so we would have the place to ourselves. While making my way to the guy's house, I saw him walking on the side of the road. He was holding a large speaker and covered in a hoodie, which seemed strange because it wasn't cold at all where we live. The road that we were on was very much outside the city lines, on a dirt road with random trailers set up every acre or so. I stopped the car and said something friendly like, "Hey stranger, need a ride?" He didn't smile. He just opened the door and got into my car without saying a word. I thought that this was odd because we literally spent a month having friendly chats, and I figured that he would act happy to see me, or at least not awkward about it. After picking him up and making my way to his house, he then tells me to turn around and go back to the main road. He wanted to get a blunt and some alcohol so that we could chill together. So, not thinking anything strange at this point, I agree and head back the other way. While on this long dirt road with no streetlights, he mentions that his power is out at his house and asked if that's okay with me. I was slightly thrown off by this, but I said, sure, as long as you have candles or something. He didn't say anything, just kept looking straight ahead like I never said anything. I then thought, what about your kids? How are children living in a house with no power? And so I asked him, and this is where things started to get very strange. He replied, "Oh, they're staying with my mom for a while. But he just told me a few days ago that his kids lived with him with no mother. and questions ran through my mind, but I didn't feel like I was in trouble yet. We arrived at the store and he got out with his face and head covered like he was hiding from somebody. This seemed strange. And then he got back in the car after making his purchase. While traveling back to his place, which was about a 15-minute drive, he then told me, "I had to sling drugs to get money for this so we could hang out tonight." I was very surprised and shocked when he randomly told me this. The situation was getting sketchy, so I asked if he had any protection, just in case we decide that we needed them. He said no, so I dropped him off at another store nearby before starting our journey down the long dirt road. After inconsistent and strange behaviors coming from the guy, I was just really wanting to get out of this situation as fast as I could at this point. I dropped him off at the local grocery store to pick up protection, thinking this could be my out. I could just drive away and block his number and be done with the situation. After he walked into the store, I was trying to figure out what to do at this point. I wanted to just drive away, but I didn't want to just leave somebody stranded. I finally got the nerve to leave, but his huge speaker was sitting in my floorboard. I wanted nothing connecting me with this person, and feared that he might possibly say that I stole the speaker. So I got out of my car, ran to the passenger side, opened the door and started dragging the speaker from the car, and I heard, "What are you doing?" It was him and he was right behind me. Fear ran through my body like I had been caught stealing something or lying about a bad grade to my parents. I told him, "Oh, I was going to move this to the back seat so you would have more room in the car." A quick save, and he seemed to have bought my horrible explanation. But now he's here in my car and my only out is gone. We're driving down the old, dark, dirt road and all that's going through my mind is, how do I get out of this alive? I'm trying to catch him in another lie to see if this is actually happening or just my imagination, but I can't seem to get any information out of him. He just sits beside me, looking straight ahead, fidgeting with something in his pockets, as though he has a mission to complete, and I'm just here to bring it to him. After driving about 15 minutes down the dirt road, I noticed that there are no longer trailers. The road is pitch black, only lit up by my headlights. I then ask him if his place is coming up, because the navigation said it should be right here. He tells me, "Oh, the address that I gave you is an old business. My address doesn't show up on Google Maps for some reason." Red alert. I started panicking just knowing that I was about to be robbed or killed in a few moments. I slowed the car down and just thought of anything that could get me out at this point. I told him that my best friend was waiting for me to get back to have drinks with her. I said that I didn't realize we would be driving so much and that it would take this long. I'm not sure if he bought the excuse or not, but I told him that I texted my friend the address he gave me so she would know how long I would be out, and when to expect me back for our planned night out. He seemed to trust my explanation, but was very irritated. He said to me, "Well, can't we just have a little car fun real quick right here? Nobody lives out here, so nobody will even see us." I said, "No, I'm sorry, my friend is going to be pissed and she's already called me when you were in the store." I told her that I would only be about 30 minutes and be back in time for drinks. I was ready to abandon my car at this point to be pulled out a knife or anything other than a gun. But luckily, he just kind of huffed, got out of my car and slammed the door, and started to put his head in the window to tell me something. I quickly hit the gas and turned the wheel, leaving nothing but a smoke cloud behind me. I couldn't see him in the rearview mirror due to the darkness of the night, but I imagine he might have been flipping me off or coughing from the dust plume made by my tires. After pulling myself together and realizing that I might have been the next Oprah story, I called my friend who wasn't waiting for me, my mom, my sister, everyone that I loved, and told them a slimmed version of the story that took place that night. I teared up a little thinking that I could have almost died, but I overcame that pretty quickly. When I got home that night, I decided to pull up the address he gave me. I noticed that about 2 miles down the road, there was one house sitting alone with no neighbors. The road was a dead end. I then used Google Street View and saw that the house was completely abandoned with no doors and dirty walls. I googled the actual address of that house and found that it was posted for sale about 5 years ago and was still on the market. I'm guessing nobody wants to purchase a possible drug house. My friends told me later that they imagined that he wanted to get me to the house and do whatever he wanted, since there is no traffic that far down the road. I'm sure it would take quite a while to find a body that went missing. After all of this, I vowed to never meet anyone from Craigslist ever again, unless it's in a police parking lot. I did vow to just never leave my house, but school and work have made that impossible. All in all, I'm okay with what happened, but it really brought to light what could happen when you least suspect it. I was 18 years old and was looking for a place to move in before I started my first semester of college, since living about 2 hours away in the backwoods wasn't very practical. The first place I looked into was great. Safe area, close to my job location, 10 minutes from school, etc. The only issue was when I went to sign up for the place. Pricing had gone up significantly since they last updated their website. Not knowing this, I put down my non-refundable deposit and was out $850 in less than 2 hours. Ouch. So now I'm out a significant chunk of money, set to start my new job in less than a week and to have no place to move into. Here comes my mom with an idea. Look for a room to rent on Craigslist. I know, stupid, but I was desperate and she just wanted to help. After browsing, I found a room available for rent that was within my price range and decided to scope out the place. I met with my soon-to-be roommate, who we'll call B. B was a gay man, yes, it's important, in his early 30s. He was new to the area, a born-again Christian, very laid back and just seemed like a cool guy in general. I met him with my mother and stepfather, none of us getting a weird vibe from him, and after he showed me the room and private bathroom, and we decided to go for it. The only thing my stepdad insisted on was installing a slide lock on the door before I moved in. I handed B my deposit and he handed me my keys, telling me to go ahead and start moving in my things. Less than 48 hours later, I was moved in and waving bye to my parents. The morning I moved in, B wasn't there. No biggie, it was a Sunday morning and I assumed he was at church or something. Lunchtime rolled around and I figured a Sunday brunch. Afternoon came by and I sent him a text. Evening I called, no answer. 8 p.m., 10 p.m., nothing. Finally, I got tired and decided, screw it. One last text and I'm going to bed. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to someone knocking on the front door. It took me a second to remember where I was, but once I did, I was curious if B ever made it home. The knocking continued and I thought maybe B forgot his house key or something, and I came out into the living room to open the door. B wasn't on the other side. It was a thin lady with ratty brown hair looking around confused. One of the first things I noticed was she was in a dirty t-shirt. It was late December and like 32 degrees outside. I'd been around enough druggies in my day to know she was probably gacked out. Regardless, I smiled and talked. Hi, can I help? Is B here? She interrupted me and stuck her head through the door to look inside. I don't think so, he hasn't been here all day. Are you a friend of his? I'm actually really worried about him. She suddenly shoved past me and into the house before answering. No, he won't answer my texts or calls. Where's he at? I don't know, ma'am. Your guess is as good as mine. I chuckled nervously, legit worried that my new roommate could be dead or hurt somewhere and no one knows it. She looked back to the doorway and I followed her gaze and almost shit bricks. A giant man steps through the doorway. He was a very dark, complected black man wearing all dark clothing, Black jeans, a black turtleneck, black boots. He was standing a bit behind her on the porch, and this guy was tall, like really tall. He barely looked like he fit through the door without having to duck under. The woman starts pacing around the living room, asking me again and again if I knew where B was. Before she got too carried away, the man told her they should sit down and chill for a minute before guiding her to sit down with him on the couch. I cautiously sat across from them on the love seat across the room. From here on, I'll call the girl CL and the guy BA. After a pace or two of awkward silence, I try to make small talk with the two of them, asking them how they knew B, their names, and don't remember them, where they're from, etc. Trying to use what southern hospitality I have to make the situation better, hoping that it doesn't get out of hand and dangerous. I quickly realized BA was sober, and didn't seem to have anything going on with him like what the chick did. He stayed cool and level with me the entire time. He had a hand firmly gripped on CL's shoulder. All of a sudden, CL jumps up and says that she has to use the bathroom. I told her where my bathroom was, and she quickly told me that she wanted to use B's instead. I argued a bit, telling her I wasn't comfortable with her doing that since he wasn't home. She ignored me and went towards the back of the house where B's room, and I assumed the master bath, shutting the room's door behind her. BA leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and just stared at me for a while, looking me over and honestly making me a bit nervous. Easy since I was already a bit on edge. He finally spoke after a long pause. "What are you doing here, girl?" "I moved up here for college." "How old are you?" "How old do I look?" "I guess something in the early mid-20 range." I told him I was 18. He cursed, sounding legit concerned. "You're not from around here." Not a question, a fact. He knew that I was in over my head, that I was uncomfortable in questioning what I was even doing in that house with two strangers at 1 a.m., and that I was honestly afraid. "Do you know about B's past?" When I told him no, BA unleashed a whole load of information to me. B used to do drugs like hard stuff. He's new to the area due to his drug issues, and that's how he knew CL. B is supposedly clean now except for the occasional thing. All this stuff I figured honestly. B looked like he had lived a rougher life, and I wasn't going to judge him for his past. BA sighed and asked me something I wasn't expecting. "You haven't done anything with him, right?" Obviously no, he was gay. Needles or nothing. Again no, I was clean. "Good, gonna be real with you. B's got it, so be careful, alright? Guy should have told you. Also, I ain't sure, but I think he gets his money from doing some bad stuff. So keep your head down until you get the heck out." CL came back into the living room then, and BA stood up and told her that they were leaving. She put up a bit of a fight about it, but he quickly escorted her through the hallway, yelling at her to shut up and wait in the car. Before he left, he told me that I wasn't safe there. Told me to leave, be smart, stay in school, and be better than all of them. He wished me good night and shut the door. I jumped up and locked it. Not gonna lie, I had a meltdown panic attack. Welcome to the city, kid. Next morning, B was home. He asked if someone was over. I identified the woman and told me that she had raided his medicine cabinet last night. Told me that it was okay, but to never let anyone in if they mentioned his name. Said people will come around that he doesn't want around. Told me that he was going out and he left for the day. The next 2 days kind of blurred together, so my apologies. I figured out B's job the next night when I heard him open the back door into his house with a hookup. The guy left. I heard B tell him that he can't use the front door and to go through the backyard. And this repeated, I kid you not, around 5 times that night, until I finally left my room to pee, and I see a guy leaning over the kitchen counter. The dude spun around to see me standing there and quickly adjusted his pants while cursing. B straightened himself from his kneeling position a few seconds later. The guy opened his wallet, handed B some cash and left out the back door. Great. I went back to my room and called my best friend and her husband, crying and wanting out. They were staying at a hotel in town that night and invited me to come stay with them. I moved back home again until I found a new place. No more Craigslist ads, no more strange roommates. I was out another 800s from the B situation, and so I felt even more defeated. B knew what he was doing. He knew that he was putting me in danger by lying to me and bringing me into that situation. B.A. got his nickname because that's what he became to me, an angel. If he never would have warned me that night, I could have been in real trouble, and possibly even gotten sick because of this reckless behavior about this guy that I lived with. I would love to meet B.A. again and thank him, but not B. Him and CL can do their own thing, far, far away from me. About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, the friendly guy had issues with his work visa, and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but I was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang out with, but I was okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for a month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are pretty normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I am woken up about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. My roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "So, do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room, that he saw me in the side alley out the window, arguing with our landlord, whom I had never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. After staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and he doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time, he says that he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time. Had seen me talking with our other roommate, who's in Hawaii, and asking me for the badge number of the officer that I had spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this crap out, because I'm not doing anything and I don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, call an ambulance." And he leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later, and when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the heck alone and leave for work. I go to work as normal and I am reluctant to return that night, but I'm too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. About 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door, walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room, that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he can't see inside. Suddenly, he screams, "I can't live like this. Why are you doing this to me?" I think he's on the phone and I don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize that he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the heck out of there. So I very quietly creep out of bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I hear you," and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door and not touching the door itself. I look toward my window and I see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear up against the glass. I was terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside of my door, and not inside of my room, so I know that when I'm going to leave, I'm going to need to take a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out the front door again, at which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on, and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams, "Do you want to fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight, I swear to God." Now, I'm a very small 5-foot girl and this guy is easily 3 times my size, so I'm definitely not looking for a fight, thanks but no thanks. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure that I can't hear any movement, and then I decide to take my chance. I took a deep breath and pulled my door open quietly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later, and I see him standing shirtless with just a pair of boxers and socks on in the dark of the hallway, his arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no for me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in hand. I run about a half block barefoot before I stop and put them on. When I look back, he's standing in the porch lights of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and I crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He said that he doesn't remember anything that happened, or wasn't sure if it was real or not. But if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sent me a photo of the house key sitting on the table and says, "I'm out, nothing else." I take a friend over there with me to scout it out and ensure that he actually left. And when we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all the fire alarms out of the ceilings. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door, and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realized that my front door can only lock by using a key from the outside, and that it had been locked when we had arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but I also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. Hey, my name's Tom and I live in the St. Louis area, and this is a story about something that happened to me that almost ruined my life forever. When I was 21 years old, I broke up with my first ever serious girlfriend, who I had been together with for 8 months. Needless to say, I was devastated. I fell into a deep depression and I began abusing painkillers and Xanax really heavily, and I began looking for any girl that I could find a rebound with. I ended up looking on the personal section on Craigslist, and I found an ad for a girl named Stephanie. I began talking to her, and I had arranged for her to come pick me up on a night, and we had intercourse that night and decided to make it a regular thing. She was an older lady, about 35, and a bigger girl, but she had her own apartment and enough money to keep me loaded on as much drugs and alcohol as I wanted. And to be honest, I really just kind of used this lady. After a while, she grew really attached to me and started to want a more serious relationship. Eventually, she started dropping hints about wanting to get married. She said that she wanted to do this to help me out, so that she could get me on her insurance so I could get help with my drug and alcohol problem, which I refused to consider. One day, we got into a big argument and she told the police that I had been abusing her and got a temporary restraining order on me. A week after she did this, she called me crying her eyes out saying, "Please forgive me, I love you," and all that other stuff, and said that she wanted to come pick me up and buy me some dope and alcohol and get me something to eat. And being the addict that I am, I of course accepted. From the moment that she had picked me up, I noticed that she was acting kind of odd. She was usually really talkative and was always on my butt wanting to talk to me about this and that. But this day, she was oddly quiet. And we got back to her apartment after I had walked in, and she immediately pushed me on the couch and pulled me down and started doing stuff. And then she climbed on top of me and began doing you know what. And she seemed angry when I didn't want to finish. I had been getting bad vibes off her the whole night, so after this happened, I immediately asked for a ride back home, which she quickly agreed to do. After I got dropped off at the house, I went inside and I sat down. My sister was watching SpongeBob, so I went and watched it with her. About 10 minutes after I had gotten home, I got a call on the phone. I picked it up, and to my surprise, a lady on the other end said that it was the St. Louis County Police Department, and that they were going to need me to come outside and talk for a second. I ran downstairs and hid my weed and my pills and then walked outside to figure out what the heck was going on. When I walked outside, there were about 7 different cops on the porch, and they were all pointing tasers at me. One of them hit me in the back of my leg with a nightstick and put me on the ground, and I was handcuffed. The cops then talked to my mom and got permission to go inside of the house, where they took a drug dog and began doing a thorough search of my room and my basement area. None of the cops on the scene would tell me what was going on whenever I would ask a question about why they were doing what they were. They told me that I would have to talk to the detective at the station. When I got to the police station, I had a bombshell dropped on me apparently. This lady had accused me of kidnapping her. She told the police that she had come by my house to return some of the stuff because we had just broken up. It was then that I had forced her by knife into her car, and that's when I kidnapped her. But thankfully, I had remembered that we made a couple of stops on the way to her apartment. She had gone inside of a gas station to get a couple of packs of cigarettes with me, so there was no way that I could have kidnapped her. The police still did a swab for DNA, and they also took my clothes for evidence, and I was forced to spend the rest of the night in the St. Louis County Jail, wearing nothing but hospital scrubs. I was released the next morning, but my ordeal was far from over. This lady began constantly stalking me. She would call me every night at odd times from blocked numbers, and either crying into the phone or just begging to talk to me. I also began seeing her vehicle quite a lot in the neighborhood, even though she lived nowhere near close to me. I called the police about this a couple of times, but they didn't really seem to care. They told me that I would have to get a restraining order on her in order to make it stop. I wanted nothing to do with the court system because I have a criminal record, and I just decided to ignore her, and I hoped that the problem would go away. After a couple months, she finally did stop bothering me as much. However, to this day, I sometimes get calls at 2 or 3 in the morning from blocked numbers. And every new girlfriend that I get, she will message them on Facebook and try to run them off. Moral of the story, be careful who you meet online. Whether you're a guy or a girl, all it takes is one crazy person to completely ruin your life. Hey guys, this is my first time posting. I thought I would tell a story about one of the more creepy encounters that I've had so far. At the time, I was a few months into undergrad in Austin, Texas, and had just become comfortable enough with myself to come out of the closet. At the time, there were no dating apps available, so to find dates I used Craigslist. It's a big mistake. I started chatting with a guy off Craigslist, Craig, and we headed off and decided to set a time and place for a date to meet in person. His ad said that he was 27 and I was 18 at the time. At first, he was insistent on meeting at his place, which I later found out was just a trailer. And it kind of made me suspicious, but in his pictures, he was very good looking. He had a nice smile, etc. So I decided to let it go. Eventually, we agreed to get coffee before going to his place. So, the day arrived and I went to get coffee and I was pretty excited. I had shown my roommates pictures of Craig and talked about how I was looking forward to meeting him. I showed up at the coffee shop and he was already there. He actually did look like his pictures, so that was a good start. We got coffee and ended up chatting for several hours before he asked whether I wanted to go back to his place. Luckily, my roommate called to check up on me, and it also happened that he was stranded because his car had broken down. So I told Craig that I would take my friend back home before heading over to his place. Well, by the time that I picked up my friend, etc., Craig was no longer answering his phone or text messages or anything. And when he finally answered, he accused me of making up some excuse so I wouldn't have to go back to his place. And basically, he was very angry and annoyed despite our great conversation earlier. I was a bit bummed, but basically didn't think of him again until years later, when my old roommate sent me a link for a news article about Craig. Apparently, he had been running a kidnapping operation using boys that he would lure through his good looks and promises. I can only imagine what would have happened to me if I had gone back to his trailer with him that day. This happened a few years back when I was 23 and I was starting graduate school. I was new to the area and looking for an apartment. I'm not too picky, but on a grad school stipend, I needed something cheap. I was admittedly naive and decided to include some Craigslist postings in my search. I saw an ad for a one-bedroom apartment. I want to stress it was advertised as a one-bedroom, one-bathroom. Looking back, I should have known that it was too good to be true. A one-bedroom condo on the water with a fireplace and a dock for kayaks. It was huge, 2 floors, and had a very nice up-to-date look for only $500 a month, most utilities included. In the ad, it was bolded, "Seeking woman tenants only." When I arrived, thankfully I was smart enough to bring my boyfriend. I was greeted at the door by a middle-aged man, about 55, in a stained tank top and boxers that stood a little too close. I immediately got an uneasy vibe from him. I wanted to leave then and there, but I felt obligated to see the place. He seemed very uncomfortable with my boyfriend being there, and mentioned that he usually just rents to women. I initially thought that he was just the landlord looking to find a tenant to lease to, until he mentioned that he was looking for a roommate to share the apartment, and that it was usually a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. He initially tried to have me come in alone to view the apartment, while my boyfriend waited outside. However, I insisted on having him come along. As he showed me around the place, it was very dark and pretty empty. I remember thinking it was strange that he didn't have much furniture since he currently lives there. I can't explain fully, but the way that he showed me around the apartment felt as if he hadn't really planned on showing anyone around, and he kind of fumbled through each room. I would ask questions about how much certain utilities were, or rules of the lease, and he would have to think about it for a few seconds, and then he would answer like he'd never thought about it prior to that. The entire time, he was standing very close to me. At one point, my boyfriend asked him to give some space. When he showed me what would be my room, it was gross. The walls were peeling. There was a bed with a mattress covered in dark stains. It was very odd considering the rest of the apartment was in good shape. The weirdest part was that he would not let me see the bathroom. He said that there was some damage from the previous tenant that he needed to fix up. I think about it all the time. What was in there?